Welcome, dear friends worldwide. Time to press it out because the hypnotic storm is here. It's battering on the very coil of the interior lens of life. The storm is guiding a pneumatic prism of doom through the highways and byways of the nearest salad bar, and it's looking for you. Whatever happened to that old tranquility we used to know? These are days of victory! You are officially a rider on the hypnotic storm.
Like awesome show.
This is Brain Software Podcast episode 85 with Mike Mandel, and I'm your co-host, Chris Thompson. So let's welcome to the very edge of what some still believe is a flat earth, this dude who is the hypno hero for the common man, the original virginal soldier, and the world's foremost impersonator of himself, Mike Mandel.
Welcome back to me and you, Chris. Great to be here for podcast 85.
That was the loudest intro ever.
Thanks, buddy. I like loud because I'm at an out of
loud is awesome because you're going deaf in your old age.
If it's too loud, you're just too damn old. That's what I say.
Oh, that is hilarious. So we've got lots of stuff to go through today that's going to be plenty of fun. A couple of things just to frame up while Mike takes a nice sip of his coffee here. You got stuck in quite a lot of traffic on your way over, I understand.
Oh, man.
Silly people having car accidents.
It was a freaking flying saucer. Here's the joke. A truck carrying something that looked like a giant flying saucer
for an
amusement park ride. No, like an amusement park ride or something. It was like off the road. And they're trying to lift this with heavy equipment. And it was plastic and yellow. And I hadn't even thought of Grissom. That's hilarious.
Oh, man. Okay. So we've just come off our latest Architecture of Hypnosis class a couple of weeks ago. We got a picture posted in our Facebook group from Flo, who is a German who then moved to Switzerland and now spends half of his time in Tanzania, in Zanzibar, which is amazing. So we gave him the bell from the class, and he posted a photo.
Amazing picture.
Do you want to explain the significance of the bell?
Yeah, because the bell, in every class we have a desk bell, ding, and it's officially the bell that Dennis Bryce Morgan stole from the Savoy Hotel.
Probably going back to podcast 55 or something.
Right. So every class we use that bell to bring everybody back when we're doing, an exercise or something, and it's traditional to give it to a student who's come the furthest or has shone in some way. And in this case, Florian was our first student ever to come in from Africa. He flew from Zanzibar through everywhere, Ethiopia and Harare. I mean, just an insane route to get to Toronto, the World Hypnotic Epicenter. And he was a great student. We studied with him, and of course we gave him the bell. And he posted online. He said the hypnotic storm has arrived in Zanzibar, and his what's it called? Caveman Lodge.
Yeah, look it up online, folks.
It's freaking amazing. He's got this great place on the beach, and that is the official bell for Caveman Lodge now. And he sent a picture of these.
That should be the official resort destination of storm riders worldwide.
It should be. Get some business to this guy. He's great. And 5 beautiful African people in all the colored garb. One is a Maasai.
It was a really cool picture.
They are holding the bell, and I said to my wife, "Look at this picture." She said, "Oh, those lovely people." What? I said, keep looking. She's looking at what? I said, "What are they holding?" She went, "Oh, is that the bell from your class?" I said, "Yes, it is."
It just occurred to me that when we write up the show notes, remind me, Mike, and I will grab that photo off the Facebook page and stick it on the blog post where we post this episode. So it should be here. And if it isn't there when you're listening, if you're listening to this on our website and you don't see that picture, you can send me an email, chris@mikemandelhypnosis.com, and tell me that I'm fired on behalf of Mike.
Excellent.
Because if I make mistakes, I always get fired, right?
That's right.
Then I summarily rehire myself, and the cycle continues.
There's not a damn thing I can do about it.
Okay, so we're going to talk about a bunch of other stuff, but I want to give a little heads up to the value we're going to bring a little later on. We are going to talk about a cool, what do you want to call this? A self-intervention?
It's a self-intervention, or it's self-neuroplasticity. You're making changes in the rewiring of your brain. You're rewiring your own brain. And it's going to be a really useful tool to know. It's quick. It's easy. I've demoed it in the class many times. John Overdurf, Melissa Tears do great versions of this. And it's actually part of pretty well every NLP pattern.
It's an NLP pattern. It's a great personal edit. We're calling it ADAC. Is that your name for it or something else?
I just call it that as an acronym to remember what it is.
Okay. And we'll explain that as we get a little later. But you're going to love it. If anything is bothering you, if you have any kind of negative
compulsive negative thinking.
Negative self-talk, stuff like that.
This is a person who bothers you all the time. You keep obsessing about them or something like that. It's perfect for things like that.
Right. Okay, so before we dive into the content, Mike, let's just remind people that we are going to be in Las Vegas in late August at the Hypnothoughts live conference, which is amazing. Scott Sandlin and Richard Clark have put together an amazing conference, and you can check out all the details at htlive.net. That's their website where you can find out all the speakers and the pre-conference and the post-conference courses. And then if you're interested in the 2-day course that Mike and I are doing on Ericksonian hypnosis, which is the Wednesday and Thursday before the conference starts, you can find out all the details at our website. The link is MikeMandelHypnosis.com/HTLive2017. So that's HTLive, lowercase letters, 2017. And then we'll be continuing to talk a little bit more as time goes on. More podcasts come out. We'll explain to you the details about our UK conference that we're doing in November.
Enough of the commercials. The thing is, Chris, you're stumbling over your words. I'm wondering if you had a stroke.
I feel like I've had a half a stroke, maybe.
Half a stroke.
All right, let's talk about the Ryan intervention.
Oh, let's do that. The Ryan intervention is something new we've added to our bag of tools, and this came out of last Wednesday night after our jiu-jitsu class, and we're all sitting in the pub, and the Loaded Dog, which is our watering hole after British Jiu-Jitsu, and we hang around there. And Ryan is hilarious because he's very precise. Very, this is not Ryan from the U.S. This is Ryan from Toronto. He's very precise, very kind of rigid and correct. Like he's Enneagram 1, so he's always trying to fix everything, right?
Yes.
But he's a great guy, but he's very skilled in things. So he's doing woodworking. He made a table and he made a whole bunch of stuff. And there was a whole thing where he tried to borrow my wife's sanding machine for someone else. Like he's very odd in a good way. So he's doing all this woodworking. He made me a knife I didn't ask for and got a blade from Japan and made this Viking knife and just presented it to me. And I was
was actually amazing.
It was beautiful. It's incredible. I was thinking I'm supposed to be handing him money or something.
And the axe.
The axe he did. And so, and if he doesn't, it'll be even funnier. The thing is that about Ryan. So he got into this woodworking phase and he was like making all this awesome stuff, Viking axes and tables and knife holders and knife rack for the kitchen. And his wife started by saying, "Why do you have to make another knife rack? We already have one."
Oh, yeah. This is hilarious. I know where this is going now. Yeah.
So what was his response? Like she starts saying, "You're making knife racks, you're making all these things out of wood all the time, and we don't need any of them." Now, this is his hobby.
Yeah.
This is how he unwinds.
This is how he unwinds. So he explains to us, she's nagging him about, why do you have to make another coat rack or this or that, whatever it is. And he says to her something along the lines of, well, honey, I suppose
this is a hobby, he says.
I could take up drugs or gambling.
Yeah, there's alcoholism is a popular hobby. Perhaps
there's a massage parlor down the street somewhere.
I can spend a couple of hours there every week. These would all be interesting hobbies for me instead of woodworking. Different ways to unwind. And he says all this completely straight face. Bottom line is she
never bugged him again. So that's very effective as a reframe, right? In fact, so it's hilarious, but let's point out to people listening, because this is brain software, that is a perfect example of a reframe, right? And in this case, that is a content reframe, right? We are reframing the content. The content here, there's content reframes and context reframes. And in this case, it's a content reframe because the content is what's being reframed. So him doing this woodworking is this annoying thing to his wife, but he's now successfully reframed it in her mind that, well, at least he's not a gambler or a drug addict or addicted to visiting massage parlors.
Right. Now, let's look at this a different way, Chris. You can also see this in terms of he's reframed the meaning of it insofar as she saw it as an annoyance and a waste of time, and he's reframed it as a hobby that helps him wind down. So he's selling the benefit of it. He's showing her the benefit, and he's saying, would you rather I had other ways of getting this benefit of relaxation?
Exactly. So it's a really nice reframe.
That's beautiful.
All right. Now, you and I both have hardcover books on order from Amazon.
Mine is arriving on Wednesday. They sent me, mine's coming in from Chapters Indigo.
Oh, that's hilarious because you told me about it after after you already ordered yours. I ordered mine on Amazon, and I'm getting mine tomorrow, which is one day sooner.
This is the story of my freaking life lately, Chris. I told my friend Michael C. Anthony about something I had bought, and naturally he got very interested because we're always into the same things. We got into alkaline water and these things that flush worms out of the colon and all this cool stuff, and just got into these weird health things at the same time. And I told him about this thing, and he went online and ordered something 2 days after me, and he's already got his.
Oh, that's hilarious.
This is getting very, very irritating.
All right, so back to the book.
The book, I'm really looking forward to this because Chris and I found it and put him onto it. This is a book of 300 logical fallacies. This psychologist teaches them, and they're freaking amazing. If you read the guy's, what's his name? It's Bo Bennett, I think.
That's it, yeah.
Yeah, and he's got some great stuff online. And one of these logical fallacies
that shocked you.
Shocked me. I was looking through the list online. One of them is a very common one, reductio ad absurdum, which is you reduce something to the ridiculous to show that the point is.
Want to give an example?
Yeah, well, let's say I say, I just want to be able to stay out a little later in the evening, honey. And she says,
oh, so you want to stay out all night long, every night?
Yeah, and next thing you'll be involved in crime because you'll be out there and you'll get shot or something, and your friends will be taking vengeance on these guys.
So all of a sudden, you staying out late one night turns into
the crime increasing in Toronto.
You're now a mob member or something.
That's just blowing up the whole picture so much. Well, anyway, it talks about reductio ad Hitlerium or ad Hitlerum, which is reducing everything to a Hitler reference. Now, the reason I find this ridiculously funny is I have done this my entire life and didn't know that somebody preceded me with this. This actually goes back to 1951. It's in Wikipedia, and someone wrote on it. And the reductio ad Hitlerum, or if you want to say Hitlerium, it sounds more English, is you illustrate your point by making the other person sound like Hitler or a Nazi, which immediately makes everyone think they're wrong. So let's say someone says, I don't worry about eating a high-fat, high-protein diet with a lot of vegetables. I just eat a lot of Twinkies and carbs, and that works fine for me. And the other person says, well, Hitler ate a lot of Twinkies, he was big on carbs. And then everyone thinks, oh, this person's a Nazi, so they can't be right about what
insane. We got to be very careful with what we say here in terms of why we find this funny.
Well,
but
just because it's
absurd.
It's the absurdity of invoking Hitler. And as we know, the entire that whole time in world history is horrific because the fact that pretty well an entire nation went off the rails is horrible. And it's a huge demonstration of social compliance and symbolism and a lot of other things happening there. But as John Cleese proved in Fawlty Towers and in the Python sketches, it is extremely easy to parody, which it becomes quite funny in that regard. So I'm saying you got to be careful how you use it, but this is a logical fallacy. And if the other person is winning an argument, simply point out how much they're acting exactly like Hitler. It immediately underwires everything they're doing. Undermines everything.
Very careful in how you use this one, and only
Chris,
in the right company.
I don't know why you'd say that to me. Hitler was very careful about things like this.
I could
look what that got us.
I think back to probably about 12 years ago. I remember being in a pub one night with you, probably after jiu-jitsu class.
Have I known you that long?
Yeah, way longer than that. Gee. But somehow the idea of me being left-handed came up, and you just looked at me deadpan and said, Hitler was left-handed. I'm serious. You probably don't remember that, but I just thought that was so bizarre. And I at the time didn't even know if you were serious or what. And very, very bizarre. So there's this whole notion of logical fallacies. I'm looking forward to the 300 of them.
I'm going to be highlighting.
Right.
And you can have the fun of not only pointing out, and we've done some logical fallacy stuff on this.
We have an episode on logical fallacies.
Well, I think we did too. We talked about the red herring and all of these different things and logical non sequitur and circular reasoning. Circular reasoning is one I hear all the time.
So we'll be pulling some of these 300 into our future podcasts and talking about them.
And we've just done one.
Yeah, that's very interesting. All right. So now I think we should talk about the avoiding of the use use of negatives. This came up
on our Facebook group.
Yeah, so I'll give a little color for background here. There was a discussion in our private group on Facebook among our students, and one of our students was just asking about this notion that the brain cannot process negatives, which is not something that we teach, by the way. I think
he said the unconscious can't process
negatives. That's it,
negatives.
the unconscious can't process negatives. And so people fired back with some comments like the usual, well, don't think of the color blue, right? So to expand on this a little bit, basically what we really mean by this is that the unconscious mind does not directly process negatives. So if you say to somebody, don't think of the color blue, that's a trick one, obviously, because you kind of have to think about it and then say to yourself, oh, I'm not supposed to think about that. Think of something else.
The only people who can do that sort of thing without seeing the color blue are people like John Grinder, who's a linguist, because they're able to parse the sentence and so on in their mind without falling into the trap of seeing it, which is kind of interesting.
Okay, I am not capable of doing that.
Well, I am now.
Yeah, that's what you say. Yeah. Well, what do you mean?
Yeah, there is no difference. It's exactly the same thing.
So if, let's say, somebody says, don't spill that milk to a kid, there's a pretty high probability that a young child who doesn't have a critical faculty formed yet, that they may just hear spill that milk. They don't really get around to processing the negative. And
they don't delete it.
Especially if their parents kind of yelling at them, like, don't spill that milk, Johnny. You know, it's a stressful situation.
Right.
Or if you always paint the example of, let's say you're in a hotel late at night and you awaken to the alarm, the fire alarm's going off, and you go out into the hallway and somebody yells, don't panic. Well, obviously, a lot of people who are freaked out by this alarm going off are going to panic.
They're already getting a PGO spike, so their critical faculty has largely gone offline. And when you say don't panic, they process panic, and it becomes uber panic.
So clearly the unconscious mind can process and understand negatives, but it does not do so directly. So it's always better to express things in positive language if you can, rather than negative language, especially when people are under stress. And you had this great example, this metaphor of...
Oh, yeah. Well, again, it's just a model, right? And I did pre-frame it by saying even the concept of an unconscious mind is a model.
Of course.
So people are saying, well, maybe the unconscious this or that. I said, don't eat the menu. You go into the restaurant, you don't eat the menu. That's just a model for the food. So thinking that you actually have an unconscious mind as a thing is probably foolish, but it's a useful model that enables us to make particular change. And Chris looks like
I'm smiling because
I have no idea why.
I still remember, I think it was somebody who did a YouTube video on this whole idea and said, there's no such thing as the conscious and unconscious mind, and attempting to prove it. Like, nobody's saying you can open up someone's head and cut the conscious mind away from the unconscious mind, during an autopsy, let's say.
Yeah.
You would hope, because you don't want to cut the head open of a live person, but it's a freaking model, people.
We see this all the time. And again, Chris, this is useful information because we're back to the straw man. Mm-hmm. People redefine what the thing is. It's a logical error, logical fallacy. They redefine it. You think the conscious mind is something you can find inside the brain. Well, no, I don't think that. And then they attack what they think we're saying and declare victory. And so that first of all, we say the unconscious conscious model is just a model, but it's a useful model, as is hypnosis and as are NLP. And I say the example I always like is when you say don't use don't or don't process in a negative way if you can choose a positive. If you are walking on a plank 1 foot wide between two buildings that are 50 stories high, and you have to cross 12 feet of space.
And let's pretend that it is absolutely still air. So there's no wind. This is not any more dangerous.
No,
and let's pretend it's a perfectly stiff board.
You're right.
Engineeringly impossible, perfectly stiff board, no deflection, no wind, but you're on a 1 foot wide surface, which would ordinarily be very easy to walk on.
But in this case, now, if you walk across this, if this plank is placed on the ground, we notice that there's a battle between conscious mind and unconscious, or between imagination and will. And if you put this on the ground, anybody in the room, anybody listening, I'm sure for the most part, can run back and forth across this 12-foot plank without falling off. They don't even have to look at it. They can jump. They can do it on 1 foot. But if you put it between two 50-story buildings, your brain says, you're going to fall.
Yeah, don't fall.
That takes over. And think about it. What's more useful? If I have to cross between those buildings in a life and death situation, then I would be focusing on crossing safely I will not be focusing on don't fall. Whatever you do, don't look down, don't fall, don't trip, don't lose your balance. That's almost certain to cause me to do that. That which we resist persists.
Yeah, and this is a really interesting thing here, Mike. I want to elaborate on this a little bit by asking you some questions. So we talk about, for example, in hypnosis, the idea that the unconscious mind's what's the word I'm looking for here? Prime directive. Yeah. Stroke. Prime directive is to protect you, right?
Right. Protect the physical body.
Right.
Because if the unconscious does not protect your physical body, you don't have anywhere to live.
So how do you reconcile the idea that if somebody was trying to cross this trying, and they would, many times people will fall, they're trying to do this experiment, let's say if it was a real life, more people would fall than not fall, I would suspect. Whereas if you just drew two chalk lines one foot apart and tried to run on them down the street like you were talking about, it would be no problem. You wouldn't be trying, you'd be doing it. So if the unconscious is running the program, yet it would result in you dying most of the time.
But that does not negate the intention of the unconscious to protect
you. It just doesn't. That's
it's just doing it in an ineffective way.
Exactly.
Better focus on looking up. Better focus on not falling. Better focus on not losing your balance.
Right.
Remember I said, Chris, with the imagination and the will, the imagination will win. And I gave an example many podcasts ago of when I was in my early 30s and was working like a lunatic, went up to my family cottage alone just to do some fishing, to wind down for a few days. I was going to stay for 3 nights, I think. Found out the island, Hikes Island on the Trent, was deserted. This is a quarter-mile long island. And when I found it was deserted, I did a search around the island. And that night, my imagination went freaking crazy. I couldn't sit by the campfire. I was looking over my shoulder all the time. Got in the cottage, thought someone was going to be standing in the doorway. My imagination went on steroids. And I came home the next day. I could handle it now because I'm way more skilled with weapons.
Yeah.
But back then, and I'd be armed to the freaking teeth. But back
your
then,
brain was doing an ineffective job
of attempting to protect me.
Your goal. And so that brings me back to the reason I brought this up in the first place is we call this podcast Brain Software because this is about learning how to do things. So once you have the requisite skills, abilities, resources, then you can do things more effectively. It becomes part of your unconscious mind's new process, right?
Right. And we're going from unconscious incompetence, we don't know something, to conscious incompetence. We hear about astronomy for the first time and realize we know nothing about it, to conscious competence, where we know something about it, we know something about it.
Like the first time you're learning to drive a standard car.
Right, to unconscious competence, which is great, where you're not even having to think about it. Your unconscious mind is doing the whole thing.
Exactly, which is really cool. Okay, so that is the avoiding the use of negatives. So we can challenge you to start using positive language, as opposed to don't use negative language.
And again, there's a subset here, Chris, that whenever you want to make hypnotic work more effective, bring in the emotions. Bring in the emotions that will motivate.
Absolutely. All right.
And now a word from our sponsor.
What are you up to, son?
Nothing, Dad. I'm just riding around on this office chair.
Well, take it slow on the turns, AJ Foyt. After all, this isn't a grain elevator.
I know that, Dad. It's just that this chair is so smooth. I can't believe how it rolls around.
Well, let me give you a lesson in physics, Danny. The reason most chairs don't run smoothly is because the casters are filled up with dead ants. This chair uses shiz-jig casters, which are 100% ant-proof.
Wow, they must be really expensive, huh, Dad?
Damn right they are, Ludwig van Beethoven, and so they should be. You wouldn't want a tribe of Amazonian ball-cutter ants setting up home in your casters, would you?
No, I sure wouldn't, Dad.
Well, it's the same for chairs, son. They don't like it either. That's why I earn big money as the spokesman for the Shizjig Corporation. This is one family whose casters are going to enjoy an ant-free life.
That's great, Dad.
I sure am, son. I sure am.
Always insist on Shizjig casters because they're 100% ant-proof. Warning, failure to properly calibrate the blowtorch before installation can lead to ant infestation, screech watering, hot dog finger salivation issues, or retroactive guinea worm blindness. Always insist on Shizjig.
The Shizjig Corporation is a division of the Bryce Morgan Corporate Conglomerate.
Okay, here's a really quality takeaway from this podcast, and I hope everybody takes this seriously. Guys, everybody goes through times where you get obsessive thinking. It can be a family member drives you nuts, an argument you had. It can be something that, say you've just quit smoking or something and you want to stay clear of it, and it keeps intruding in your thoughts. Any kind of compulsive thinking or addictive cravings or even an anxiety or a stressor, this is a great way of dealing with it. And we call it ADAC. Now, that's not the name. It's an NLP meta program, meta pattern rather. And it's a wonderful thing. And ADAC stands for associate, dissociate, associate, and then collapse. So ADAC. And here's how it basically works. Chris has seen me do this a number of times. Have you had a chance to use this yet?
Yes.
And did he get a good result?
Yes. Well, you did it on me as the subject in class 2 weeks ago.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, it was fantastic.
A man my age can't be expected to remember all of these things. Anyway, the bottom line is this. So let's say you have a case like, as in my case, where there's a family member who is driving you nuts, to use the medical word, and it's not my wife. So when that happened, I got into obsessive thinking. It was driving me crazy. And so what I did was this. I applied this formula. So the first thing you want to do is associate into the annoying state. You want to feel it from the inside. Remember, you want that ego state executive that is having the problem.
Yes.
You don't want to be talking about it or to it. You want to be dealing with it. So
and usually it's easier to close your eyes when you're doing this.
Sure.
Imagine that you're right in that situation.
Yeah, so imagine that person who bothers you, like feel it right now. How bad out of 10 can you make it? So I can make it, like a 6 out of 10 or something, let's say. So then that's the associating into it. Now the D comes in, dissociate from it. And the way you do this is as soon as you start running the pattern, the earlier you can intercept this pattern, the faster and the better you'll be free of it. The reason why is there is neuroscience behind this. You are actually running a neural pathway in your brain. So to rewire your own brain, here's what you do. You associate into it. You feel a sense of it. Then you dissociate. And the way I like to do it is I actually do what Melissa Tears does. I say, stop. Right out loud. I put my hand up like a stop sign, and I imagine I push that picture away from me.
With your eyes open.
With my eyes open now, and I see that picture away from me.
Imagine that you've just pushed it.
Pushed it away, and it's down on the floor, it's small, and it's away from me. So I say stop, and I push it out of my head and down in front of me really fast, because your brain works best quickly. So this takes like 1 second. And now that picture, whatever it is, I don't need detail in it. And then I want to reframe it by associating into something powerful. So I'll immediately say, I'm done with that. I'm living a good life or something like that. So I'm now saying I'm done with that. I'm keeping it external.
Now, how do you get into the third, ADAC, the associate, you're associated into a negative situation of some sort that you don't want.
Right. Now let's say
dissociating it.
Dissociating, and I'm saying I'm done with that.
Right. Okay. So you haven't gotten to step 3 yet.
Right. That increases the dissociation.
Gotcha.
So now I have to associate into an empowering state. So I'll change my breathing. I'll change my posture. I'll relax. I'll breathe deeply. I'll think of a time I felt amazing.
Like when you're shopping for weapons.
When I'm shopping for weapons. When I'm using weapons on the store owner to get even more weapons.
Owner?
Well, because you won't sell them to me.
Something like Hitler would have said.
Oh, shut up. There is no difference. It's exactly the same. So bottom line is now I'll associate into a positive state. I'll say to the client or subject I'm working with, think of something that makes you feel amazing. What was it? Oh, my last vacation, or oh, my dog. Okay, go into that state. Feel your love for your dog, that empowerment. And I will anchor that on their shoulder or something. And maybe stack a few anchors. And I'll say, okay, now feel that feeling of your dog loving you and your family on vacation. And I'll touch the anchor on their shoulder and hold it and say, now look at that over there.
Which is the dissociated
thing. And I'll point at it like Milton Erickson. I'll say that. In other words, you're not feeling it still. Bring this into it and notice how it has just changed.
Right.
This is step 4 now. This is collapsing the anchors. Mm-hmm. It's bringing the positive state and collapsing it with that other thing. It has to change. Melissa Tears nails it. She said it must change because you're bringing in new wiring in the brain. You're bringing in something different. And remember, your brain is making new connections at the rate of at least 1 million per second on average. So this is easy for your brain. And then the person will check. I'll say, how bad is it out of 10 now? And you say, it's like a 2 now. Okay, so get another empowering state. We get them in that. And now look at that, staying in this empowering state until you flatten it to 0.
Okay.
And I'll leave them in a really positive state, feeling how they've overcome it. So what they do now is anytime, if that ever starts coming back, anything like that, immediately stop, push it away, make it small, dissociate from it, bring in a resource and collapse.
Think of something that makes you feel great.
Yes.
Really fire up that experience. and then map that across and ask, how has this other problem state, that problem changed now that I'm approaching it from this new, empowering, feeling good state?
Now, this is the ultimate way of doing it, because what you're doing is rewiring the brain. So remember, the old pattern of thinking these bad thoughts, whatever, wanting to drink too much, whatever it is, are a neural pathway. And as soon as the person learns to intercept it immediately, you're no longer walking very deep into the woods. You're starting on the path going, aborting the visit to the woods,
right,
and starting a new pathway. And after time, the brain will prune that old pathway and it'll fall away and die away. Now, even on the most basic level, Chris, this works well with a pattern interrupt too. Even if you're not building in the resourceful state, you can do it as simply
to get somebody off of their old crappy path.
Right. So how would you do that?
Well, you would, if it was somebody else?
Yeah.
Oh, if it's somebody else, and let's say I would use our, whoa, this stuff really comes out.
Okay, so let's pretend you got somebody listening.
Okay,
and they
so
got a
somebody's
pattern
listening, and I see that they're just running this pattern where they've gone from being happy to all of a sudden visibly upset. I might just look at them and with total congruence say, whoa, this stuff really comes out. All of a sudden, they're confused now. What? And he's, forget it. Everything's okay.
Yeah,
So,
Carl Smith does that great one. Carl Smith does the one. He says, quick, what's your phone number backwards? And he's pointing at, what's your phone number backwards? And he says, I don't even care.
Yeah, it's okay. I don't care. Not very interested.
Yeah, don't even care. So when you interrupt someone's pattern, you can hijack that walk through the bad forest. Remember, the reason I'm using that metaphor is you walk through a forest for the first time, there's no path. You keep walking through, and other people keep walking through. You get a deeply ingrained path with no foliage there. Mm-hmm. It's bare dirt, and you got to start a new pathway and prevent yourself from walking through the old and let everything grow back in, and it will stop bothering you. The sooner you do it, the faster you intercept it, and the more consistent you are, the less these things will ever bother you again.
And you can do this on yourself in the moment too. When you catch yourself entering some sort of negative self-talk or whatever, if you notice it consciously, you can just say, stop, push it away, dissociate, and then bring in something positive.
Right.
And then
and
look
when
at
you that's great. When you dissociate, stop, push it away, dissociate, increase the dissociation. I point at it down there and I say, I'm done with that.
Yeah.
And by saying done with that, I've increased that level of dissociation. I'll say something like, I'm feeling good these days, and I'll just breathe and feel strong. And now I'm switching from one to the other. And this is way better than a swish pattern in my mind, because the old swish pattern, where you bring the new pattern and smash it through the image, it has to be visual, and it works 60% of the time. But that's chaining them. It's going from one to the other. It's substituting one state from the other. And this whole ADAC thing, it brings the resources into the bad situation.
Yeah, it's a really cool technique. I like it a lot.
So, let's just add it to something else. Like, let's say somebody has to make a presentation tomorrow, and they don't like making a presentation. Start to get a feeling about what they don't like, dissociate from it, push it away, see it over there, now get into an empowering state and look back at that from the new state and keep doing it till it flattens.
And that empowered state, just to be clear here, that can be something as linear as another time you gave an amazing presentation.
Oh, for sure, Chris, for sure.
Or, why did I say linear? It's not really linear.
No, I was wondering what you meant by that.
Directly
it's a great
connected.
Example, yeah.
Or it could be something completely different. It could be that time when you were a kid playing at the park and you just felt amazing.
Yeah. Somebody gave you an ice cream cone for the first time.
Or, you're out in center field catching a fly ball and you caught it. Anything. Yeah.
Right. So think of these times in your life. Start to recognize what patterns you need to break, which leads us, and now you got the tools to do it. Chris is going to give us empowering question of the day.
All right, here we go. What obsessive or compulsive thoughts am I going to completely eliminate? What compulsive ideas or irritating thoughts will I erase from my mind?
Nice one, Chris. Well, I've got today's metaphor, and it's the camping trip. And once again, it's a true story. I was forced to go camping a lot as a kid. We bought a family cottage that I referred to earlier on Hikes Island on the Trent River when I was 16. Prior to that, every frickin' weekend, once the warm weather hit, the family would go camping. And my dad was huge on the family getting together, and other relatives would meet us there. And that's when I first started noticing the effects of language on people and how people could not answer questions clearly. I remember pulling up at Outlet Beach Provincial Park, which is now Sandbanks, and we'd taken the 2-hour drive from Toronto. We pull in, and I just want to get out of the car because I'm a little kid. And my family's there, cousins, and my mom said, "Was it cold last night?" And my cousin answered, "It rained." And my mom said, but was it cold? And she said, I said it rained. I mean, so I remember this even as a kid, but this was my weekend, Chris, and I got to frickin' hate camping. I hated setting up tents, which was always in the rain. I hated carrying a canvas bucket with a rope handle to a pump to get water. I hated cooking on a Coleman stove. I hated getting up cold with ants in a sleeping bag. I just hated it. I really did not like it at all. But I had an occasion that really gave me an insight, and it pretty well turned me into who I am today. We were camping once. I must have been 11, I think maybe 12. My mom, my dad, and I, and my sister, who's 7 years older than me, all in a tent. Come to think of it, my sister wasn't there. She must have moved on because she was 7 years older, so I'm thinking she wouldn't be there. My dad, my mom, and I for sure. We're all in this 9 by 12 tent at a camping site, and in the middle of the night, we wake up because someone is opening the zip to get into the tent. Now realize a couple of nights previously, somebody had come through, had broken into people's coolers looking for beer. They'd stolen food. They'd cut all the milk cartons open, just drain it, just jerks. And this scared me to death. It was such a violation of security. And I was a little kid. And that night, the zip was going up in their tent. Someone was actually trying to get in. And my dad's response was to sit up terrified in the dark in his bed and yell, "It's okay, I got him." And I sat there. We're all just panting in the dark, terrified. And the noise went away. And I remember thinking, my God, he can't protect us. And that moment changed my life.
Thanks, everybody, for listening to Brain Software, episode 85 with Mike Mandel, and I'm Chris Thompson. And normally at the end of the podcast, Mike and I go out for lunch, but now I'm thinking, let's just go camping.
You idiot.
All right, listen, you'll hear us again on the next
Hitler
podcast.
did a lot of camping, mind camping.
Oh, yeah, that was not even... That was great. That was not even planned. It was stupid and enjoyable. And
good.
All right, everybody, we will see you. You'll hear us on the next podcast.
Mr. Thompson, did I ever tell you the most remarkable story about the cheese tray, the road accident, and the fourth Johnny?
No.
I remember it must have been about 19, 13 years. A horrible story, but one of the greatest adventures I'd ever been in. We were all in London having a bit of relaxation and some rest. 1913, the war was going on in the trenches. The regiment had come back for a break. And I remember Bryce Morgan and I had gone to completion camp where they'd put a lot of the poor old soldiers who'd been injured, and the war was over for them, and they were completing their tour of duty and waiting for the war to just be over with. And Bryce Morgan, being a wonderful chap, had brought in some cigarettes and things for them, and these chaps were bandaged up, sitting on the lawn in the sun, just recovering, wrapped up, and smoking cigarettes and drinking brandy and looking at dirty postcards, if I recall. And Bryce Morgan and I made sure they were all right. We came back to London because completion didn't need us at that moment. And Peter Fitzwadsworth Smythe, the old colonel, was having his 50th birthday at our club Blades. And we were all gathered around. It was a wonderful afternoon. I remember he was sitting in a big easy chair, and there was a lot of frivolity, and Bryce Morgan had brought in some food, and there was a huge tray of cheese and olives and sliced meats and brandy and cigars he'd provided somehow, despite the fact of rationing going on. And Peter Fitzwadsworth Smythe was sitting there, and I remember the usual chaps were there. Guy Billingham was there, and Ray Houston, and Dennis Bryce Morgan, and of course, and there was the three Johnnies: Johnny Borkman, Johnny Brookman, Ding T. Larciar, and Johnny Lathiam Yotswoe. And all of a sudden, Bryce Morgan had gone out to the truck to bring in some more brandy. He came running in. He said, "Oh, there's been a horrible road accident. We must do something." And Henry Squatter heard this. He was in the corner. He was a camp medic, and he ran outside. And we all finished our cups of tea and had a bit more sandwiches, and we went out and had a look. And there was a chap lying in the road. He'd been run over by a huge lorry, and his innards were crushed. And I said, "Oh, good grief." We all went back in because it had started to rain, and we were playing billiards and thinking, what are we going to do about this? And Squatter said, "We can't just leave him there. We've got to bring him in." I said, "Well, we don't have a stretcher." And Squatter said, "Well, we'll use that tray, big metal tray with the olives and cheese and sliced meats on it." We said, "Oh, hang on, let's not be hasty here. Let's finish the food first." So we poured some more brandy and lit another cigar and finished off the food. And about 40 minutes later, we all headed out. The chap was still alive, and we bundled him on the tray and brought him in. And he was barely conscious, but he thanked us all. We poured some brandy down his throat, wrapped him in a warm blanket. Well, not much of a blanket, really, just some sheets of brown paper stapled together, dipped in vinegar. And he said, I must thank you, chaps, before I die. He said, oh, who are you? And I said, well, I'm Bud Ralston, and this is Peter Fitzwadsworth Smythe, our colonel. It's his birthday. And this is Guy Billingham and Ray Houston, and this is Henry Squatter, the medic who arranged for you to be brought in. And these are the three Johnnies, Johnny Bortman, Johnny Brookman, Ding T. Larcion, and Johnny Latham Woe. And the man was fading. He said, oh, this is the most wonderful thing. He said, my name is Johnny as well. We said, oh, what is it? He said, oh, I'm Johnny Suleiman classed Philo Erev Wantave. And we said, Johnny Suleiman classed Philo Erev Wantave. And of course, Johnny Latham Woe and Johnny Brookman, Ding T. Larcion, Johnny Bortman were thrilled about this. And the man died right there in the chair. So we propped him up and we had a bit of a wake for him and gave him some brandy and a glass in his hand and wrapped him in the brown paper and vinegar. And we played billiards until the rain stopped and then we called the undertaker.
That's my finest work. That is insane.